fine this morning. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, occasional rain or drizzle easing later this morning. For the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and patchy drizzle. And the weather in the main centres today: Auckland mainly fine, high cloud clearing in the afternoon, southwesterlies and 20. Tauranga early cloud, then fine, southeasterly and 21. Hamilton fine with some high cloud until evening, light southerly and 20. Wellington low cloud or possible fog with a southerly change this morning. Patchy drizzle about the south coast this evening and 16. Christchurch low cloud or fog morning and night and long fine spells in between, light winds and 18. For Dunedin mostly cloudy, occasional rain at first, easing to the odd shower from afternoon, southeasterlies turning northeasterly and 14 degrees. You're with RNZ National, funded through New Zealand On Air. It's 10 minutes past 7.
And you're listening to Morning Report, and the already tense relationship between the United States and North Korea has ratcheted up after the detention of another US citizen in Pyongyang. The Korean-American man was arrested as he was trying to leave the country. CNN's Ivan Watson's in South Korea with the latest.
We have independently now confirmed the detention of a U.S. citizen. CNN has spoken with Martina Aberg. She's the deputy head of mission at the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang, which represents U.S. interests there, since the U.S. has no diplomatic relations directly with Pyongyang. And she confirmed that a U.S. citizen was detained Saturday morning local time in North Korea. As she says, quote, he was prevented from getting on the flight out of Pyongyang. We don't comment further than this. So at this stage now, this brings the number of Americans detained in North Korea that we know of up to at least 3. The Yonhap News Agency, which is an agency here in South Korea, had earlier reported that this was a U.S. citizen, an apparent academic who had worked at a university in China with the surname Kim, which is very common within the Korean community. Referring to other Americans who have previously been detained. One is Otto Warmbier. He's an American university student from the University of Virginia. He was arrested in early January of 2016 and has since been sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. A second U.S. citizen is Kim Dong-chul, who was arrested in October 2015, charged with espionage, and has been sentenced to at least a decade of hard labor. We, again, don't know the reasons why this individual was detained, what kind of charges could be pressed against this individual. But certainly, once somebody is being held in North Korea, judging by past cases, it can be very, very serious and can lead to minimum weeks, if not months or years of incarceration.
That's CNN's Ivan Watson in South Korea, 13 past 7.
The Defence Minister, Jerry Brownlee, has hit out at North Korea, describing it as having, quotes, evil intent, end quotes. His comments were in response to North Korea's stern message to Australia at the weekend. They accused Australia of blindly towing the US line and warning of a possible nuclear strike as that persists. Australia's Foreign Minister Julie Bishop says the warning represents a grave threat to Australia. David Rowe is the Sydney Morning Herald's security correspondent. I spoke to him last night.
In a sense, it's not entirely surprising that they've singled Australia out. Along with Japan and South Korea, we're the closest US allies, well, and New Zealand as well, we're the closest allies of the United States in Asia. And so North Korea obviously threatens South Korea periodically and has made threatening gestures towards Japan as well. So when Julie Bishop and Malcolm Turnbull are so vocal in condemning North Korea and for demanding action against North Korea, it's not all that surprising that we would find ourselves on their radar. So I think they have singled us out because of that vocal response.
firstly, you see it for what it is, a whole lot of sabre rattling, and I think attempts to sort of destabilise through outrageous statement. You have to take it somewhat seriously because you never quite know. But if they were to, for example, decide that they were just going to unilaterally attack a United States aircraft carrier, I would suggest that would be the end of the regime. And the regime itself is very much part of about its own self-preservation.
Is the information that you're getting that the regime is indeed in some sort of end days here? Because this is a diplomacy nightmare, isn't it?
I think the problem is no one knows much about the internal workings of that regime, and even our Chinese counterparts tell us that they're not fully over who does what and where it sits. It certainly, though, obviously has a depth of pretty rumpy sort of people, and when you, I suppose, have a daily threat hanging over your head, if you get on the wrong side of the leader, you're a goner. That only happens if you've got lots of other people who are willing to follow those orders. So it's somewhat worrying from that point of view. But as I say, I think if they did anything too precipitous, that is the end of them. And self-preservation is a big motivation for that regime.
Now, we'll be talking about this further with the Prime Minister, Bill English, shortly on Morning Report. If we can also turn now, though, to civil defence, another one of your portfolios. What are the fundamental changes that you feel are needed to civil defence? This is as you're using a new review to highlight what you're calling the shortcomings of the organisation. What changes need to be made?
Well, I think put it in the context of it being an organisation that's based on a structure that was initially developed in the early 1950s, ratified about 1959, and then altered on numerous occasions since, the most recent occasion being 2015. But a question arising from several incidents or disasters that they've had to deal with since about whether or not the chain of command and the structure for risk analysis is appropriate. I want to hastily say I have every respect for the people who do commit themselves to civil defence. When things go wrong in any community, people have to step up, and these people do. And I just want to make sure that the legislation that backs their actions and guides their activity is fit for purpose in this century.
Absolutely. The difficulty, though, with some of these threats is that decisions have to be made immediately. People need to make choices immediately. And, for example, the tsunami threat, does that need to be dealt with in some sort of different way? Because, as I understand it at the moment, it takes an hour at least to convene a panel to talk about whether to put out a tsunami warning. That's far too long, isn't it?
Well, we've put up the money for GNS to have 24/7 monitoring, as they earlier in the year suggested they'd like to. We're also looking at the possibility of a 24/7 disaster centre, if you like, so that things can be more quick and more immediate. In the end, the time it takes to get scientific information is the time it takes, and you can't particularly rush that. So the messaging that if it's long and strong, then get gone is the best you can do. That's always been the case. But the early warning system that we're looking at also is going to be the cellular system that should be up and running by the latter part of this year.
Just very briefly, do you think this should be something that local government heads or central government is in charge?
Look, I think the scaling of that is something that we need to look at. Certainly when you get into the post-disaster situation, there is a role for central government, but local people do know their areas, and I think that's, despite all of our ability to sort of use GPS and everything else, a pretty important thing to maintain.
Jerry Brownlee, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for coming on Morning Report. 22 minutes past 7.
In the latest traffic news in Wellington, there was a crash southbound on State Highway 2 at Silverstream. The car has been cleared of the lanes, but you can expect some delays as the congestion is dealt with. And drivers heading into Christchurch are being warned of heavy fog this morning, so use your headlights and watch your following distances. A 27-year-old man will appear in court today in Rotorua on charges related to a gunfight at the weekend. Shots were fired between rival gangs on Saturday morning at Kuiro Park. The shootout happened near a children's playground, and the area was full of shoppers at the time, with the weekly market in full swing. Here's Tom Furley.
The Rotary Club runs that market, and its elected president, Noel Hill, was there on Saturday morning.
We were sort of halfway through collecting the site fees when a lady came over to us and said that we should ring the police, that there was members with gang patches floating around, and it looked like there could be problems.
He says police were quickly on the scene. Stallholders RNZ spoke to said they weren't even aware anything had happened until being told about it afterwards. Mr Hill says it's unbelievable the shooting came so close to the children's playground, and he concedes there may need to be closer monitoring in the future.
That is a problem if anything, that sort of thing happens close to where the children are. But we'll just have to keep an eye on things and make sure that we have close contact with the police if necessary.
Local City Councillor Charles Sturt says he's had many frightened residents phoning him, some of whom ducked for cover.
Pretty disappointing, because we as a council have spend a considerable amount of money at Purell Park to make it a family-friendly place. And to have this happen in broad daylight and on a Saturday is just unbelievable.
Mr Sturt says he doubts it'll put people off the area, with many families at the park again yesterday afternoon. Detective Senior Sergeant John Wilson says the police received around a dozen 111 calls about the incident and says it's concerning someone would even bring a gun to a place like that.
It's happened next to a children's playground. We have a market going, we have shoppers, we have families with small children, and clearly there was a recipe for disaster if one of these bullets had gone astray. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, but that's purely by luck rather than anything else.
He says police have had no indications to suggest gang tensions have been rising recently. One arrest has been made with a 27-year-old man to appear in court today. However, Detective Senior Sergeant Wilson says with the help of the public, he hopes to catch more of those involved. Witnesses have reported between 4 and 10 gang members could have been involved, and the police are urging anyone who saw the incident or may have filmed it to get in touch. For Morning Report, Tom Furley.
25 minutes past 7 now. Let's speak more on North Korea and on security with the Prime Minister, Bill English. He's in the Wellington studio. You can also watch this interview. It's being streamed live on our Facebook page. Good morning. Let's first of all talk security. Can you confirm that there's a Five Eyes meeting in New Zealand this week?
Yes, there is. There's one of the regular conferences that they have. We work with the other 4 countries combating terrorism, protecting our citizens around the world. So it's an arrangement that works well for New Zealand.
OK, what sort of length of time is it going to be continuing for?
Well, I'm not going to go into all the details about it. It's a pretty security conscious group of people and event. But that they'll be discussing all the current issues. Are you or any member of the government going to be attending? Yes, myself and Chris Finlayson will be attending a dinner in the next few days. And is it just for that, or will you be there, or indeed will he be there for a longer period of time while various aspects are being discussed? Yes, I think he will be as the relevant minister. My role there is largely about reaffirming the relationship, or the relationships with all the different participants. OK. Now, North Korea is something that's very much in the headlines. I guess that's going to be on the agenda too there. Is that something that will be discussed at this? I simply can't tell you that, but it's certainly on our minds. Would you expect that that's something that will come up at some stage? Well, I'd expect that that's a kind of topic they're discussing, but we have our own, we're getting our own stream of advice about it, independent of the conference. Now, there was a line that we reported earlier on coming from Reuters that North Korea saying yesterday it was ready to sink a US aircraft carrier to demonstrate its military might. When you hear that sort of statement coming from the regime, what do you think needs to be done? Well, it's quite concerning. What I think needs to be done is what's being done now, and that is China and the US, who are the countries with by far the most capacity to influence the behaviour of North Korea, working together to achieve a result without conflict. Now, that's not going to necessarily stop the regime making threats, but those 2 countries will have a better idea of their ability to carry out those threats and an ability to put pressure on their decision making. And indeed, how diplomatically can that be controlled or contained? Well, so far it has, and I think as long as the US and China work together as positively as they appear to be doing, my view it's likely to be able to be contained. The capacity of North Korea to deliver on those threats has yet to be tested, but we don't want to be testing it. Would you be supporting any US policy in this regard? Oh, no, we would evaluate any decision they made, particularly if it affected New Zealand, on its merits.
Do you think that New Zealand's put in the firing line somewhat, especially at the moment with the ramping up of the tensions and indeed the Five Eyes meeting happening at the same time?
No, I don't think so.
OK. Would you be happy to tolerate a nuclear North Korea?
Well, this is part of the pressure that's going on now, is that a nuclear North Korea is unlawful. It would be against a number of resolutions the UN Security Council and the UN has passed. We don't want to see a nuclear North Korea, particularly one that is so threatening and provocative.
Let's talk just briefly as well while you hear about the reshuffle. Are there new faces that are coming into the Cabinet?
Well, we're fortunate to have a large pool of talent. I mean, we are losing a couple of experienced, very successful ministers, Hekia Parata and Murray McCully, and we have a whole range of people who could step up into the Cabinet. So it'll be a fairly narrowly focused reshuffle. We want to replace those positions and the subsequent changes that keep the balance and the focus of the Cabinet on delivering for the public, because a major reshuffle this close to an election, I think, would be a bit of a distraction.
There's been talk about the new foreign minister role going to either Gerry Brownlee or to Jonathan Coleman. Can you confirm that those two are the names in the frame?
Well, I'll confirm the appointments this afternoon, because there's that one is the education vacancy, obviously, and then the subsequent changes that have to be made through the Cabinet.
Now, just before you go, the Ninth Floor, which is a series that Guy and Espinosa has made for RNZ, would you agree with Jim Bolger's statement that unions are too small and that neoliberal economics have failed to deliver rewards to everyone?
Well, actually, no, I don't agree with them. I understand the views. I've discussed these matters with Jim over a period of 25 years. He, in my view, showed very brave leadership through a very difficult time in New Zealand. He made decisions from which we are benefiting considerably. And in New Zealand, without the kind of changes that were made through the late 80s and 90s, would be a place with much less capacity to lift low incomes, like the announcement that was made just last week, to support public services.
He's wrong?
Well, I don't agree with that interpretation of events, even judging it by the standard of the decisions he made himself, for which I have every respect, was there through it and dealt with a difficult situation very well.
Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming into the studio. That's Bill English, the Prime Minister, at 29 minutes to 8.
And coming up before 8 on Morning Report.